Howdy folks. Today we're going to be going through the DXOS Getting Started Guide, or our React tutorial. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about DXOS at the beginning, but mostly I'm going to let the code of DXOS explain itself as we go through and run through that guide pretty quickly. So we'll jump in just a second. But one thing I'll say about DXOS is to point out that we are currently in technical preview mode. What that means is that while it's ready to build stuff and play around with it, it's certainly not ready for production systems. You probably will experience data loss at some point. We'll be changing some of the APIs. And so this video is a run through of our current React tutorial, but I would expect the video to be out of date fairly quickly. As soon as that happens, I'll try to note in the description that we've changed specific APIs and that kind of stuff. There may be a new version of the video, or just go follow the Getting Started guide directly. But hopefully this will give you a taste of what DXOS is like through running through this, this quick React tutorial. And then the final thing I'll say is that this video isn't going to be extremely polished because, as I just pointed out, it will probably be out of date within weeks or months. I'm not going to put a lot of time into editing this. I'm treating this just like I treat one of my live streams. This is a one-take wonder. There will be errors, there will be mistakes, there will be me having to rewind through things as we go through. So hopefully you're along for the ride if you want to see what it's like to get started using DXOS. So let's jump over. The first thing I'll say is I'm not going to tell you that much about DXOS. Like I said, we'll just let the Getting Started guide kind of reveal it as we go through. But DXOS is designed to help you build local first, peer-to-peer, collaborative applications, real-time collaborative applications. And it has a database layer and an identity layer that allows you to do that. So that's a little bit about what it is. It's mainly a JavaScript framework. I know this says the operating system, but it's a JavaScript framework for now. Is the way that is the interface through which you'll experience it. All right, if you go to docs.dxos.org, you can follow along with this tutorial yourself. If you click the Get Started guide, that takes you to our quick start. The quick start is like, I want to get started in 2 minutes version of this, and you probably want to, we're actually gonna go through the entire React tutorial, which would be like maybe 20, 25 minutes. So I'm gonna click over here on the left to React tutorial. Let's downsize this and pull it over here, and let's start going through. So from the top of the tutorial, what we're going to be doing today is building a React app using a DXOS app template. And that app template includes our app kit, which gives you some components out of the box for interacting with the database, interacting with the identity layer. We're also going to use Echo, the database that comes with DXOS that will solve for real-time state consensus. And then we're also going to create an identity with Halo. And finally, we'll deploy the app to Netlify. So let's get started. First thing we'll need to do is create a directory that we can cd into. So I'll go ahead and do that. And then we're going to use our DXOS app template called the bear template. The one thing I'm going to add here is at latest to the end. That's not here, but should be. It shouldn't affect most of you, but we'll go ahead and hit that. We'll call this thing shared counter. These app templates are built on top of React, Tailwind, Vite, TypeScript, and they get you up and running really quickly. So the bare template is like the bare minimum to get started with a DXOS application. Some of the other templates have like a working to-do list or a working counter application that you can basically start from a working app and edit. So now we need to do an npm install. I'm going to use pnpm install so that this runs really quickly, since I've already installed these packages multiple times on my machine. And by really quickly, I mean quicker than npm, but not instantaneously apparently. Hopefully that runs pretty quick. And then we also open up a new tab and open our code up in VS Code, where we'll be doing most of our editing today. And let's see how things are coming along here. All right, great, that's done. I'm gonna hit pnpm run serve. That'll start the app up. Great, and now I can grab this URL and I'm gonna open it in a guest profile. This won't matter as much for you, but I'll talk about why I'm doing that in a second here. Opening up in a guest profile, we see a loading, and then we see your code goes here. Great, so we have installed the app, we have the app running locally, and we have the code so that we can go through and edit it. Let's bring that up in VS Code. All right, so if you look at this app, it's a pretty standard React app organization. If you look in the package JSON, you'll see that most of what is in here is DXOS related dependencies, React, and then a couple of things to help out with that: TypeScript, Tailwind, and Post CSS, and then Storybook for testing out the UI. All right, and then if we jump in here, you'll see the indexed HTML is just loading main TSX. Main TSX is instantiating app TSX as our root component here. If we jump into app TSX, here's what we see. All right, so in app TSX we have, let me make this a little bit bigger for y'all if you're following along on a smaller screen. We've got a theme provider that we're returning. We're instantiating a service worker here, an error boundary, a client provider, and then there's the your code goes here, right? So we can change this to hello world and save, and we see it refreshes over there. So we're looking at the right thing. It's refreshing. What is all this stuff? What I'd tell you is most of it really doesn't matter that much. If we jump over to the tutorial file, I explain what each one of these things. The most important thing here is the client provider. So this client provider bootstraps the DXOS client. And what is the DXOS client? Well, the way that we've architected DXOS, it runs the database in a service worker inside the browser. And what that allows it to do is this service worker can stand up alongside any of the running tabs or running applications in the browser, all accessing the same database. And that's why we also have this use register service worker here, 18. So the client provider then gets a client that connects to this service worker that's running the Echo database, and also contains the user's vault and their identity, which we're going to see in just a second. And then that client is now available inside any other component that wants to read from the Echo database or look or interact with the user's identity in some way, shape, or form. The rest of this stuff, the service worker toast container, the error boundary, the theme provider, generic fallback, these are all part of our app kit, which kind of give you a working app experience right out of the box. So we're going to see some of that Chrome and those React components that are bundled with AppKit in just a second here. So let's go to the next step. Next step we're going to be doing is creating a user identity. One of the core ideas in DXOS is that all data is owned by a user. It belongs to a specific user, and it's encrypted with their private key, so that that only they can read it, and also that it kind of, in a very real sense, belongs to them. It's also stored local first within their browser in IndexedDB or on their actual device. So we're gonna come in here and open the Explorer. Let's create a new file. We'll call it counter.tsx. This is gonna be a new React component. Let's go ahead and copy this code right here and drop it in to counter.tsx, and then we'll come in here and replace that code with counter. There we go. All right, we're gonna need to add the import. We'll go ahead and add it and hit save. And now over in our guest framework, we should now see a new screen. We do. Okay, so this create an identity is required to continue, is part of the DXOS app kit. And what this is saying is that when we started the service worker and we tried to use the user's identity, there was no user vault created yet. And so we need to create a new vault that's going to create a new private key for the user, which can be used to encrypt all of the data that's stored. So you notice that there's also a device linking flow. You could use another device that's already authorized to link and replicate the data from that device onto this. We're not going to go there yet. Let's just do the create an identity flow. So click here. I'm going to call this just guest because I'm in a guest profile. The reason I'm doing that is this identity is contained within the Chrome profile, the guest Chrome profile. That means it's kind of throwaway. So I use guest profiles whenever I'm doing testing of a DXOS application. And that's just part of the way that Chrome is architected to isolate the different profiles. So they're almost treated like different devices. So here we go, just guest, click continue, click done, and then we're seeing nothing. And that's appropriate because we see this return here. So this const identity use identity, part of our React client, what that's doing is getting the identity of the user like checking to see, like I said, is there something in that service worker where the user's vault exists? And then this use spaces grabs all of the user's spaces. Now, if there's always one space that's created with the identity, so there's never 0 spaces. So this is going to say basically grab the only space because this is a brand new identity. And then we're going to do some things with it. The other thing about data is that all data lives within a space. There's no sort of global data in Echo. So these 2 lines create an identity and create a space. And now we're keyed up to do some stuff with that space. So let's go to the next step of the tutorial. All right, updating UI state from Echo. What we'd like to do is grab some data from Echo, the database, and then show it on the screen and just kind of show you how easy that is. All right, so in the place of this return statement right here, line 9, let's go ahead and copy this code and then replace it with the code from here. Let's also grab that import, update the import, and then hit save. Okay, let's walk through this line by line. Line 9 is creating a counter variable, and it's using this use query, which is also part of our React client. So use query is querying the database for all data that matches this little key value right here, type counter. So find anything of type counter in the existing space or the currently selected space, and then assign it to this variable. Now, the really cool thing about this use query hook here is that it automatically creates a subscription, as you see here, such that any time that this counter variable is changed in the Echo database, either by another application running on this device, or as we'll see in a second, by a device that's running on another machine entirely, through replication, the Echo database will automatically update, and then it will update the value of this variable. And what's nice about that is that down here in our return code, where we're going to render out some values, we will that value that's rendered out will be automatically updated. So let's go through our return code right quick. We're returning a div, and inside that div, we're checking to see if counter has been defined yet. Now, if useQuery doesn't find a thing called type counter, then this whole block will not execute. But if it did, we would see a clicked 0 times, presumably counter will start out at 0. So let's go over to our guest profile, hit refresh, and we should see nothing. Nothing is expected because our Echo database contains nothing. We don't actually have anything in it yet. And I would show you the dev tools in a little bit where you can actually inspect the contents of the database. But there's nothing in there right now. So let's go to the next step of the tutorial. We're now updating the UI state from Echo, but there's nothing in Echo. So we need to put something in Echo. So what we'll do next is we will add a use effect. And this is a React way of making sure that we're initializing the data once and only once, the counter variable. Use effect comes from React, not from anything that we're doing. Now let's walk through this code line by line here. This use effect says anytime the space and the counter change, then run this use effect code. If the space or the counter change, like we get a new space, then we want to check and make sure the space is defined, right? Use spaces need to return something. It did. If it does return something and the counter variable that use query like looked up a counter in that space, if the counter variable was not found or is undefined, then we need to create one. And so this next line 13 will do that creation. Let's walk through what happens here. This const counter calls for a new expando. Now it's saying it can't find that import, so I'm gonna go ahead and command plus and import that. Expando also comes from our React kit. Now, expando is a new, is basically an untyped map that you can insert into the, insert into Echo. So we do have the ability to support typed data, and you can use TypeScript types, and we have this thing called protobufs to define the schemas, but this is an untyped data. So expando is kind of like a generic map. And then inside this expando, we're initializing it with a key value that says type counter, and then a values array that is currently empty. Then we call space.db.add the counter. Now space is, remember the space that we have right here, that db is referring to that's a handle on echo within the space, and then adding the counter is like putting the counter into the database. And now this will automatically replicate across different devices, as we'll see in just a second. So like, let's go ahead and hit save, jump back over to our thing, and we now have clicked 0 times. So if we look down here at line 22, where we're deciding what to emit to the screen here, we're saying counter.values.length. Well, we defined values as this array with nothing in it, and we're looking for its length. So the length is going to be 0, and so the counter values length is 0, clicked 0 times. There you go. Okay, so we now have our clicked 0 times. Let's go to the next step in the guide here. All right, updating the counter. Let's add a button now to update the counter. It's kind of boring if the thing has been clicked 0 times, but there's no way to update it. So let's do that. The way that we're going to do that here is we're going to add a button to our UI. So I'm going to grab this div. Let me see where I need to grab from and to. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to grab this entire return statement and replace it, and then we'll go through line by line here. All right, returning that. Okay, so what we're saying again, we're returning a div if the counter exists, which it should now that we have this use effect that runs and initializes the counter for us. Then we're going to throw another div that's going to center the text for us. We're going to have a button here that says click me. And the button has an on-click handler that does something really simple. It takes the counter, it accesses the values array in it, and it pushes an integer, the integer 1, onto that array. So pretty simple. We're directly modifying the counter. Let's go see how that works out here. Okay, great. We've got this click me now. If you click it, it now increments the counter. Pretty neat, huh? So the interesting thing about this is I can actually, to demonstrate this, I'll have to, well, one thing is that the data, like I mentioned, is replicated across all, is running in a shared worker. So it's replicated across all tabs that are running. So I can come over here and add another tab, localhost 5173. I think this works in guest mode, and it does. And you can see as I'm clicking on these, they're both incrementing at the same time. One other thing I'll show you in my main, or in another profile here, is I'll go to localhost 5173. In this profile, I'll need to create an identity. We'll call this one Jess at BF. Continue. Done. All right, now if I click here and then I close this tab, now the app is gone. Close it, open it back up, run it again, and it's still there. So the data is stored on my device associated with my user, and you can access it through that. So like I mentioned, these peers are connecting. One of the things you might be curious about is how would multiple peers on multiple systems connect to each other? So all peer connections in DXOS actually take place over WebRTC, peer-to-peer. So we do need a signaling server in order for the two peers to establish connection with each other. And DXOS runs a signaling server. We roughly call that Cube. There's also another set of services that we run to help things connect. You can run your own Cube if you want to like do this self-sovereign hosting, but Cube includes a signaling service that allows peers to find one another. And once those peers find one another, then they communicate directly and replicate the contents of Echo directly. So if you're following along too, you might be curious why we used an array here. I'd ask you if you've dealt with CRDTs before or have not, maybe you should pause the video now and think for a second, why did we use an array here when we could have just, all we're displaying is a value or an integer. Couldn't we have just added one, incremented an integer every single time? So pause and think about it. For those of you who are still here, the answer was like sitting over here, it's because the Echo is actually, the way that replication works within Echo is it's backed by a CRDT. So YJS is actually used to handle replication or the conflict resolution within replication. And so if we have two peers that are both writing to this array at the same time, let's say that it's an integer value instead of an array, and let's say that the value of it is 1, and then both peers click the increment button at the same time, they'll both set the value of it to 2, when what actually should have happened is both of those clicks should have been recorded independently and the value should be 3. And so you basically have a race condition around updating the integer, and CRDTs don't handle that well. So, so to get around that, you have to use an array where you actually push elements on. And so then if the array contains one element for both peers and both peers push two separate distinct elements onto the array, when the the CRDT logic runs, it will merge both of those elements onto the array. It'll then have 3 elements and it will have the appropriate state. And the point of calling this out in the shared tutorial is to point out that just because you have a CRDT, it doesn't magically solve all the problems of conflict resolution. You actually have to be somewhat thoughtful about the data structures that you use to contain your data so that things are that conflicts are handled for you properly. But with Echo, you do get that automatic conflict resolution. And if you've chosen your data structures well, you're going to get a working solution. Cool. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Pretty simple. Again, DXOS is hopefully going to be helpful for you. If you want to run through our Getting Started guide or go through our docs, see if you can build something, jump into our Discord and chat with us. I'm really curious to see what you build. Thanks for hanging out.